Elias Carter had lived on the same stretch of land in Montana for more than 20 years. Yet every morning felt almost the same as the one before. He would wake before sunrise, long before the sky even turned pale blue, and sit on the edge of his bed for a quiet moment. That moment still, calm, untouched by the world was something he valued more than he admitted. The old ranch house around him creaked softly as the cold worked its way through the wood. Winter had a way of making everything speak, even walls. He would pull on his boots, heavy and worn from years of use, and step outside into the crisp morning air. The frost on the grass always glittered like tiny diamonds under the porch light, and his breath made small clouds that drifted away into the darkness. The world felt big at that hour, too big sometimes, and Elias felt small inside it. Not in a sad way, but in a way that reminded him he was just one man doing his best to keep things running. He lived alone. The ranch had once been louder, full of his parents' voices and laughter. His mother used to hum while cooking breakfast, and his father would sit at the table tapping his fingers on the wood as he looked over the day's tasks. But life had changed, slowly at first. Then suddenly, his parents were gone now, and the silence they left behind had settled into every corner of the house like dust. Elias didn't talk about it. He simply kept going, because stopping felt like something he wasn't allowed to do. Most of the town folks respected him. They would greet him kindly, say things like, "Good morning, Elias," or "How's the herd holding up?" But they knew not to push too far. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. And in a small town, quiet people were often misunderstood. Some said he preferred the company of animals. Others said he was still protecting his heart after too many losses. The truth was simpler. He didn't know what to say most of the time, and silence felt easier, safer. His days were a mix of routine and responsibility. He fed the cattle, checked the fences, and made sure the barn was stocked. He repaired things himself, broken gates, loose boards, even the old tractor when its engine decided to complain. The work was never ending, but it gave him purpose. In the rhythm of chores, he found a kind of peace. The evenings were the hardest, though. When the sky turned orange, then purple, then finally a deep, endless black, the loneliness grew louder. He would sit at his kitchen table with a plate of simple food, a piece of bread, some meat, maybe soup, if he had made enough earlier, and listen to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sometimes he turned on the radio, just for the comfort of another voice, but he rarely kept it on for long. The noise felt strange after a day of quiet. Still, he wasn't unhappy. Not exactly. Life just felt heavy sometimes, like a coat he couldn't take off. He told himself that this was enough work to do, a roof over his head, a life built with his own hands. But every once in a while, when he saw couples at the farmer's market or families gathered in the diner, something inside him tightened. He wondered what might have been different if he hadn't been so afraid to reach out, or if life hadn't taken the people he loved too soon. One early winter afternoon, with clouds gathering like thick cotton above the mountains, Elias decided to drive into town. A storm was coming, and he needed supplies before the roads got too icy. The old truck rumbled to life after a few tries, and he let it warm up before starting down the long, winding road that led to the main highway. Snow hadn't started falling yet, but the cold carried a warning. The roadside barn turned market stood about 15 minutes from his ranch. It was a place everyone in the area visited when they needed something quickly: feed, cooking oil, warm socks, or just a friendly chat. The wooden sign out front swung slightly in the wind, its red paint faded but still readable. Inside, the store smelled like hay, dust, and cinnamon. A small heater hummed in the corner, fighting the chill that seeped through the old walls. Mr. Greeley, the store owner, gave Elias a nod as he entered. "You're just in time," he said, stacking a box of canned beans. "Storm's supposed to hit any hour now." Elias nodded back. "That's why I figured I'd come. You and half the county," Greeley chuckled. Elias walked down the narrow aisles, picking up the things he needed. Animal feed, a bag of flour, a few canned goods, and a pair of gloves, because his old ones were finally giving out. As he moved from shelf to shelf, he heard a few locals talking near the counter. "She came by yesterday," one said. "Tallest woman I ever saw." "Didn't see her face," another replied. "Just that hood. Didn't say much. She's the widow who moved into the cabin near the ridge, right?" "Yep. Folks say she keeps to herself. Never takes the hood off. I was litter. I was now that wasn't. Never takes to her. To her." Elias paused, partly out of curiosity, partly because he rarely heard new stories in their quiet town. A widow, living alone on the ridge? That area was beautiful, but lonely, too open and cold in winter. Whoever she was, she must have been strong or stubborn to choose a place like that. He didn't join the conversation, of course. He simply finished gathering his things, paid, and stepped back into the cold. The wind had grown sharper, and a low rumble of thunder echoed far away. A rare sound in winter, but a sign that weather was shifting quickly. On the drive home, the world around him grew dimmer. The clouds pressed low against the mountains, and the air held the stillness that always came before heavy snow. Elias gripped the steering wheel, focused on the road. He knew the drive well, but winter didn't forgive mistakes. Halfway back, he saw something that made him slow the truck. A tall figure was walking along the side of the road, wrapped in a heavy hooded cloak. The wind tossed the edges of the fabric, but the person kept moving against it. Step after determined step. Elias frowned. The nearest cabin was still a long way off. Walking in weather like this wasn't safe, especially with the storm so close. As he drew closer, he recognized who it must be the widow people were talking about. Her height alone gave her away. She stood at least a head taller than most men he knew. But something about the way she carried herself was gentle, almost careful, as though she was trying not to disturb the world around her. Elias slowed to a stop beside her and rolled down the window. "Ma'am," he said, trying to sound polite and not too forward. "Storm's coming in fast. You need a ride?" She turned her head slightly, though the hood still hid her face. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she nodded once and stepped toward the truck. He unlocked the door, and she climbed in, moving with surprising grace for someone her size. She settled into the seat, folding her hands in her lap. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was calm, low, with a note of tiredness hidden inside it. Elias nodded. "No trouble. Roads aren't safe for walking right now." She didn't answer. She simply looked out the window, as though studying the world carefully. For a few moments, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the wind brushing against the truck. Elias wasn't good with conversation, but the silence didn't feel awkward, just quiet, like most things in his life. As they continued down the road, he glanced at her once, just once. She kept her hood low, the shadows covering her face. He wondered what she looked like, but he didn't ask. Some people kept their guard up until they felt safe enough to lower it. He understood that more than most. He didn't know yet, couldn't possibly guess, that the woman sitting beside him was someone from his past, someone he had once known before life had taken its sharp turns. He couldn't know that the moment she pulled down her hood later that night would change everything he thought he understood about loneliness, memory, and connection. All he knew in that moment was that a stranger needed help, and he could offer it. And for a man who spent most of his life expecting nothing new, even a small change, a passenger in his truck during a storm, felt strangely important. Like the quiet beginning of something he wasn't ready to name. The truck moved slowly along the snowy road as Elias guided it through the rising wind. The woman beside him sat very still, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her large cloak spreading around her like a soft blanket. Even in the dim light, He could see she took up more space than most passengers would. Yet she didn't seem imposing. She kept her shoulders slightly curved inward, as if trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The steady hum of the engine and the soft tapping of small snowflakes against the windshield filled the quiet. Elias was used to silence, but something about this silence felt different. It wasn't lonely. It was simply waiting. He cleared his throat softly, unsure why he felt the need to break the quiet. "You live near the ridge cabin, don't you?" The woman turned her head slightly toward him, though her hood still covered most of her face. "Yes," she replied in a gentle voice. "I moved there. Not long ago." Elias nodded. "It's a pretty place, but a bit far from town. I like the distance," she said after a moment. "Sometimes, being too close to people feels louder than being alone." He understood that more than he expected. "I get that." She didn't say anything more, but Elias sensed she appreciated the simple acknowledgement. He didn't pry. He wasn't the type to ask strangers personal questions. But he did feel a small tug of curiosity. Most people who moved into that cabin were looking for something peace, quiet, or a fresh start. And he wondered quietly what she might be looking for. The truck's headlights cut through the growing snowfall as the wind began to push harder from the side. The road curved gently, climbing toward higher ground. Elias tightened his grip on the steering wheel, alert but calm. This path was familiar to him, and he trusted his experience. After another few minutes, the woman spoke again. "Thank you for stopping," she said quietly. "Most people would have driven past. I suppose I don't seem very easy to approach." Elias glanced at her. "I didn't think that. Weather's too dangerous to leave anyone walking." "I'm grateful," she murmured. Her voice had a softness that surprised him. Most people he met who were tall or strong-looking carried themselves with outward confidence. But she moved and spoke with a gentleness he didn't expect from someone people described as the giant widow. He didn't like that nickname. It sounded careless, not considering her feelings. He chose his next words carefully. "Are you coming from town?" She nodded. "I needed a few things before the storm." "Running out of supplies?" he asked. "Not exactly," she said. "I think sometimes I just need to step out, even for a little while. The cabin is quiet. Too quiet. Maybe." The way she said it made Elias's chest tighten a bit. He knew how a house could feel big and empty when you were alone inside it. "I know that feeling," he admitted. For a moment, she turned her hood slightly toward him. And though he couldn't see her face clearly, he sensed she was studying him, maybe surprised that he understood. Then she faced forward again, as if retreating gently into silence. The storm grew stronger. Snowflakes thickened, floating in swirling patterns across the windshield. The wind whistled around the truck's frame. Elias slowed a little, keeping control steady. Beside him, the woman rested her hands calmly, though he noticed her fingers curled slightly, as if she sensed something significant was coming. When they reached the ridge, she suddenly lifted her head. "Could you stop here?" she asked softly, surprising him. He blinked. "Here? It's still a mile from the cabin." "I know." Her voice was steady, but something behind it carried a quiet urgency. "Please. Here is fine." Unsure but respectful, Elias eased the truck to the side of the road. The snow now fell in slow, wide flakes, drifting like feathers. He put the truck in park and waited. She didn't move at first. She only breathed, slowly, deeply, as if gathering strength. He waited patiently, sensing she needed time. Finally, she turned toward him. Even with the hood hiding her features, Elias felt the heaviness of her gaze. She lifted a hand, large, gentle, and laid it lightly on the edge of her hood, but didn't pull it back yet. "There's something I need to ask you," she began, her voice just above a whisper. Something unusual. Elias felt his stomach tighten with mild confusion. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he nodded. "All right." She took a small breath. "One kiss," she said softly. "Nothing more." Elias froze. His hand stayed on the steering wheel, but his fingers loosened from surprise. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "A kiss?" "Yes." She kept her voice steady, though he sensed her nerves beneath it. "Just one. No questions. No promises. No further meaning unless you choose to give it one. I need it. That's all." He stared at her hooded figure, searching for understanding. She didn't sound playful, or bold, or romantic. She sounded emotional, like someone making a request they had thought about for a long time but feared asking. "I don't understand," he admitted gently. "I know," she whispered. "And I wish I could explain it in a way that made sense. But I can only tell you that I need something simple, something honest, to remind me that I'm still part of the world." Her hands tightened in her lap. Just one kiss. Nothing more. Elias exhaled slowly. He wasn't a man used to surprises. His life was steady, predictable. This request was nothing like anything he had experienced before. Part of him felt confused. Another part felt moved by the vulnerability in her words. He turned slightly toward her. "Why me? Why? Why me?" She hesitated. "Because you stopped for me." Her voice was soft. "Most people don't stop for someone they don't understand. You did." He didn't know what to say. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the ridge with a soft white blanket. It felt as if the whole world had paused to listen. Then she lifted her hands slowly to the edges of her hood. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from emotion held too long. "Before you decide," she murmured. Her voice broke just a little on the last word. Elias felt his heart beat heavier in his chest. Something about her tone, gentle, familiar, stirred. A memory he hadn't touched in years, but he couldn't place it. She pulled the hood back, and Elias froze, not because of her height, not because of her features, not because she was a stranger, but because she wasn't a stranger at all. Her face came into view slowly, framed by the falling snow. Soft lines of age, gentle eyes he once knew, familiar freckles across her cheeks, and a kindness he remembered from long ago. Not just remembered, cherished. "Maggie?" he breathed, barely audible. Her eyes glistened, though she held her expression steady. "Hello, Elias." Memories hit him like quiet waves. A tall girl in school, shy but strong-hearted. A friend who had always looked out for him, even though she faced teasing for her height. Someone he had once shared secrets with under the old maple tree behind the schoolyard. Someone he had lost touch with when life carried them in different directions. He hadn't seen her in decades. And now she sat next to him, asking for something simple, yet deeply personal. "I didn't think you'd remember me," she whispered. "How could I forget?" He said softly, still stunned. She looked down for a moment, gathering control. "I've lived a long life since then," she said. "A life with joy, and a life with hard years too. I came back because this place was the only one that ever felt like home." She lifted her gaze again. "And before I try to rebuild my life here, I need to feel like the person I used to be, even just for a moment." Elias listened carefully. She wasn't asking out of romance or desperation. She was asking out of human need, connection, memory, grounding. And the request no longer felt strange. It felt heartbreakingly genuine. "Maggie," he said quietly, "you don't have to be alone in this place." She smiled softly. A small, sad smile. "I know. but sometimes it takes a simple, honest moment to remind you that you deserve not to be. She looked into his eyes. One kiss. Nothing more. She one kiss. She one kiss. She looked into his eyes. Elias's breath fogged slightly in the cold air between them. He didn't answer right away. He respected the moment too much to rush it. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the truck, everything felt still. He finally nodded, gently, not out of pressure but out of understanding. "All right," he whispered. "If it means that much to you." Her eyes shone with quiet gratitude. She leaned forward slightly, not demanding, not assuming, waiting for him to meet her halfway, as any old friend would. And Elias, moved by the years between them and the loneliness they both carried, leaned forward too. The moment their lips touched, the world outside the truck seemed to soften. Snow drifted gently around them like quiet, floating dust. The kiss was not long, not rushed, and not filled with anything dramatic. It was warm, simple, and honest, exactly what Maggie had asked for. Elias felt her breath tremble just slightly, as though she was letting go of something she had carried alone for a very long time. When they pulled back, there was no awkwardness, no sudden confusion, only a kind of peaceful stillness, like the first calm after a long storm. Maggie opened her eyes slowly, and Elias saw something familiar in them, something he hadn't seen since they were children. It was the same soft, almost shy hope she used to have when she asked him to sit with her at lunch or walk home from school together. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. Elias nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth in his chest. "You're welcome." For a moment, neither of them moved. Maggie gently lowered her gaze, her hands resting again on her lap. The hood had fallen back behind her shoulders, revealing more of her than she usually shared with strangers. Her hair was tied loosely, a little messy from the wind, and gentle lines shaped her cheeks and forehead, lines that told stories of a life lived with strength and patience. But to Elias, she still looked like the girl he once knew. Older now, tired in small ways, but still Maggie. He glanced toward the windshield. Snow continued to fall in soft sheets, coating the road and the edges of the forest. The world outside seemed untouched, quiet and white. Inside the truck, the air felt warm from their shared breath. He cleared his throat. You took me by surprise." Maggie let out a small laugh, quiet but genuine. "I imagine I did." "It wasn't a bad surprise," he added quickly. She looked at him again, and this time, her smile reached her eyes. Elias shifted slightly in his seat, unsure how to say the many questions forming in his mind. Why had she come back? Why the hood? Why the request? Why now? But he didn't want to overwhelm her. She looked tired, not from the walk or the weather, but from something deeper, memories, perhaps. "Do you—" She hesitated, thinking. The silence lingered long enough for him to wonder if he had asked something too personal. But then she nodded. She pulled her cloak around her shoulders, not to hide but to keep warm. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of it. "It's been a long time, Elias," she began softly. "A very long time." "It has," he agreed. "Too long." "I always remembered you," she said, her voice steady. "Even when distance and years changed everything else. I used to think of our childhood more often than you might believe. Those memories became something like a little pocket of safety for me. Simple moments I could hold on to when life got complicated. Calm, 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 calm." Elias felt something shift inside him, like a door he hadn't opened in years, creaking softly. "We were good friends," he said. "We were," she replied gently. "You were the one person who didn't treat me strangely for being tall. You never laughed or made comments. You just saw me." He smiled faintly. "I didn't think of you as different. You were just Maggie." She breathed out slowly, almost as if the name itself comforted her. After a moment, she continued, I left this town when I was still so young. I thought if I went somewhere else, I could live freely, without people looking at me like I didn't fit in. I thought I would build a new life without the shadows of old memories. And did you? For a while, she said, her voice thoughtful. I made a life. A quiet life. I got married. Worked. Tried my best to be strong for others. But even in those years, I sometimes felt like I was carrying a weight that never lessened. Not from the world outside, but from the things I never allowed myself to feel or say. Elias listened carefully. She spoke with calmness, but her words carried a heaviness. When my husband passed, she went on. The world felt too large again. Too empty. Too silent. And I realized I had spent so many years taking care of others that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. Elias didn't interrupt. He sensed she had more to say. I came back here because I needed to remember who I was before life changed me. Before I lost the parts of myself that felt simple and comfortable. And when I saw the old ridge cabin was for sale, something in me said, Go. Go back to where you started. Let yourself breathe again. Go. Her breath shivered a little. But it wasn't from the cold. But it hasn't been easy, she whispered. People look sometimes, they whisper. They call me the giant widow, though not always with bad intent. Still, it makes me feel separated from them, like I'm meant to stay hidden beneath this hood forever. Elias shook his head gently. People talk, but that doesn't mean their words are true. I know, she said quietly. But when you live alone in a silent cabin for too long, thoughts grow louder than kindness. Elias understood that more deeply than she realized. She took another breath. I asked you for a kiss, not because I wanted affection from a stranger. Not even because I wanted something romantic. I asked because I needed something real. Something gentle. Something that wasn't about judgment or expectations. Her voice softened. And I remembered you as the one person who once gave me that kind of honesty. Elias felt warmth spread through him, not embarrassment, but something like quiet honor. That's why you asked me? Yes. She looked at him with steady eyes. Because I knew you would understand. Or, at least try to. He sat for a moment, letting her words sink in. The snow outside grew thicker, softening the edges of the world. It felt like the night was wrapping them in a blanket of calm, giving them a space to speak truths neither of them had voiced in years. Maggie, he said slowly, you don't have to hide under that hood. Not from me. She looked away, almost shyly. I'm used to it now. You don't need it, he said again, more gently. She met his gaze, searching it carefully, as if to make sure he meant it. Then, she reached up and pulled the hood fully back, letting it rest behind her neck. Her face, open and unguarded, looked both familiar and new. There were lines beneath her eyes, tiny marks of time and experiences, but the softness she carried as a child was still there. Elias felt a sudden quiet ache in his chest, not sadness, but a kind of nostalgia for a time they had both lost. You look the same, he said, surprising even himself. She laughed softly. I don't think that's true. It is to me. Maggie looked down, touched by the words in a way she couldn't hide. They sat in silence for a few more moments, letting the world calm around them. Then Maggie gently placed her hand on the door handle. I should walk the rest of the way, she said softly. It's not far. I'll drive you, Elias offered immediately. She shook her head, though kindly. No. I need the walk. Just a few minutes to breathe and think. But thank you. Elias understood. Sometimes people needed a little space after opening their hearts. He nodded. All right. But I'll wait until you reach the cabin. She smiled a small, warm smile that felt like sunlight in the cold night. You always were careful with people. 50. She opened the door, and the cold air drifted in. She stepped out into the snow, the flakes catching in her hair and on her cloak. Before closing the door, she paused and said softly, This moment means more to me than you know." Elias felt his breath catch. "It means something to me, too." Her eyes softened, and she nodded once. Then she closed the door gently and began walking down the road toward her cabin. Her figure, tall and steady, moved through the snow like a quiet shadow, but one that carried warmth instead of fear. Elias watched her carefully, the headlights lighting her path. She walked slowly, as if embracing the moment and the memories it stirred. As he watched her disappear into the falling snow, he realized something important, something he hadn't understood in years. He wasn't the only lonely soul in Montana, and maybe, just maybe, the emptiness inside him had finally met its match. The snow fell heavier as Maggie's tall figure slowly moved toward her cabin, and Elias waited in the truck, with the engine running softly. He watched her carefully, not out of worry alone, but because something inside him felt changed, as if the quiet life he had carried for so long had suddenly opened a small door to something warmer. When Maggie finally reached her porch, she turned around. Even from the distance, through the veil of falling snow, Elias could see her lift a hand in a small wave. It wasn't big or enthusiastic. It was gentle, grateful like everything else about her. Elias raised his hand in return, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the cold night warmed between them. Only when she stepped inside did he allow himself to drive off. The road back to his ranch felt different now, not as empty. The snowflakes swirling around the headlights looked like drifting memories, soft and meaningful. For the first time in years, he felt his thoughts reaching forward instead of backward. His house was quiet when he entered, as it always was, but that night, the silence had softened. It felt less like something that swallowed him and more like a familiar companion. He hung up his coat, warmed his hands by the stove, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. His mind returned again and again to Maggie, her voice, her eyes, the way she spoke with gentle honesty about her life. He thought about the kiss too, though not with confusion. It had been a moment of truth, not romance. A moment that asked for nothing, and still gave something meaningful. He touched his fingertips lightly to his lips, almost surprised at how real it had felt. He wondered if she was sitting by her fireplace now, thinking the same thoughts. Over the next few days, the storm thickened, covering Montana in blankets of clean white snow. Roads became slippery, and the cold grew sharper. Elias spent long hours shoveling pathways, breaking ice from troughs, and making sure the animals stayed warm. It was tiring work, but it kept him busy. Yet every time he paused, whether to breathe, or wipe his brow, or rest his hands, his thoughts drifted back to the night on the ridge. He found himself glancing more often toward the distant line of trees that separated his land from the slope leading to Maggie's cabin. He wondered if she needed help, if she had enough wood, if she felt lonely in that quiet home. Finally, one morning after a long night of snowfall, he decided to visit her. Not because he felt obligated, but because something inside him simply wanted to see her again. He placed a few pieces of warm bread in a cloth, filled a small bag with extra supplies, and set out on foot. The truck wouldn't make it through the deep snow, but he didn't mind. The walk felt meaningful, like he was stepping toward a part of his life he had forgotten how to reach. The sky was pale blue, soft with winter light. His boots sank into the snow with each step, making crisp, crunching sounds. Steaming clouds of breath drifted from his mouth as he walked steadily toward the ridge. Maggie's cabin came into view slowly, half hidden by tall pines and a gentle slope of land. Smoke drifted from her chimney, a good sign. She was home, and she had warmth. He climbed the porch steps and hesitated for just a breath before knocking. The sound echoed softly inside. Moments later, the door opened, and Maggie appeared. Her hair was down today, soft waves resting around her shoulders. Her eyes widened in surprise, and then a warm smile spread across her face. "Elias," she said softly, "I didn't expect you." "I brought a few things," he replied, showing the bag in his hand. "Didn't want you to run low on supplies with all this snow." "That's kind of you," she said, stepping aside. "Come in, please. It's cold." He entered, feeling the warmth of her home wrap around him. The cabin was small but cozy. There was a fire burning in the stone fireplace, casting a soft orange glow around the room. A wooden table sat near the window, and a thick rug covered the floor. It felt peaceful, lived in, but not cluttered. Maggie had always liked simple spaces. "You walked all this way?" she asked, hanging his coat near the door. "Didn't trust the truck on these roads," he answered. "Besides, I needed the fresh air." She smiled faintly. "Well, I'm glad you're here." They sat at the table, and she poured them both warm tea. The steam curled gently upward, filling the room with a soft, earthy scent. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence. He noticed little things: the way she held her cup with both hands, the gentle curve of her smile, the quiet strength in her posture. After a few sips, Maggie looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "You must have been wondering about the other night." "One." He set his cup down slowly. "I've thought about it." "Yes." She nodded. "I want you to know. It wasn't meant to confuse you. I wasn't asking for anything more. It was just something my heart needed." "I understand," he said gently. She smiled softly. "I hoped you would." He leaned forward slightly, his voice warm but careful. "Maggie, I'm glad you found me that night. I'm glad I stopped." Her eyes softened. "So am I." For the first time since he arrived, Elias felt a gentle spark of ease settle within him, like something inside both of them had finally found a place to rest. They talked for hours about childhood memories, about how the town had changed, about their parents, about the years they had lived apart. And the longer they spoke, the more natural it felt, as if time had gently stitched their paths together again, without rushing, forcing, or expecting anything from either of them. Later, Elias helped her fix a broken hinge on her door, then chopped a little extra firewood for her, though she tried to convince him she could manage. He laughed and told her he was only doing it because he needed the exercise. She smiled, knowing he was helping because he cared. When it was time for him to head back, the sky had grown soft with the colors of the setting sun. Maggie walked him to the porch, her cloak pulled around her shoulders. "Will you come again?" she asked, her voice as warm as the light behind her. "If you want me to," he replied honestly. She nodded, and her smile was small, but full of meaning. "I'd like that." He stepped down the porch steps, and before heading off, he turned back to look at her. The snow around her cabin sparkled gently, and the glow from the windows made her look almost golden. "I'll be back soon," he said. "I'll be here," she answered, her voice steady and sure. Over the next weeks, this became their new rhythm. Elias visited often, sometimes to help with chores, sometimes just to share a meal or talk by the fire. Maggie welcomed him with a quiet joy that warmed the small cabin more than the fireplace ever could. She began to remove her hood more often, even in town, because with Elias nearby, she felt less afraid of being seen. Little by little, they created a space where loneliness didn't feel heavy anymore. They didn't rush into anything new. They simply allowed the comfort between them to grow naturally, like a small flame that didn't need forcing to stay alive. By the time spring arrived, the snow melted into soft streams, and the land around their homes began to bloom again. Life felt different, not perfect, not rushed, but beautifully gentle. The story didn't end with a sudden promise or dramatic confession. Instead, it settled peacefully into a simple truth. Two people who had lived through years of quiet and loss had finally found a place where they didn't have to carry their loneliness alone. And it all began with one kiss, meant to mean nothing, but ended up meaning everything.